The Black Widow. A 2-year-old process of working on a painting about the mysterious mother feeding raw meat to her countless creepy children. After restarting this project more than 4 times, I finally decided to work smart and started with thumbnails. In the last episode, I created 4 thumbnails, and today I'm gonna choose the best one and start turning it into a precise sketch using perspective guides. So, it is time. It is time for us to continue. We pretty much unanimously chose this final thumbnail I did. I'm gonna be using smaller precise line, perspective guides, and I'll make a lot of mistakes for the anatomy of these characters. A sponsor of today's video is a new tutorial on Yiihuu.com. The author of this 13-hour-long tutorial is a German freelance artist Daniel Lieske, and he's gonna tell you about his method of creation of a panel for a digital graphic novel. You know, something I've been doing for the last 4 years with outlandish curiosity. And I gotta say, I think if I would take his approach, I would probably be long done with the whole book by now. Because he's really using systematic stage-by-stage approach. He's using a lot of layers to define lighting and make everything very broken down into a formula. So you can approach each page the same way, quickly stage by stage. So you're never overwhelmed. So yeah, if you're interested in this art style and a very sustainable and actually working approach to creating digital graphic novel, go check it out through the affiliate link in the description. Alright, let's start doing our thing. And I think I'm gonna need the boxes. Yeah, I'm gonna just turn off the value sketch, make the rough sketch very transparent, and let's do some preparations, starting with perspective guides, I guess. Oh yeah, remember in one of the versions we had this thing that the perspective was on the vagina of the Black Widow. Kind of the same thing in here. Let's stick to it. Alright, here's a picture of a workhouse in London of Victorian times. I guess it will very well do as a reference, and all of these as well. Man, I actually need another guide for the perspective, but Painter won't let me do it. When you choose a 2-point perspective, it's only this kind. Like both points are on the horizon. And if I want to move it, it's gonna tilt the horizon, which is... who needs that? I need one point to be the central point, the way it looks like in 1-point perspective, and another one at the very top over here to give me this tilt of the camera upwards. And there's literally no way to do it at all. This is all I have. You know what? Hell with this whole thing with perspective guides from the apps. It's a lot easier to do it yourself, actually. So I'm gonna do it, and you guys watch how to do it. Okay, so I spent several days after recording this episode nerding out about creating the best and most universal way to quickly create your own perspective guides. So I'm gonna show it to you real quick in Photoshop, but it can work in any other app. So the main thing we need to do is to prepare 2 transparent PNG images, a star and parallel lines. So right now I created this empty document, 8K rectangle. In an empty layer, I'm gonna draw a 2-pixel black line, like this, perfectly horizontal, edge to edge. Now, if you're in Photoshop, you can right-click on the layer right now and convert it to a smart object. If you're not in Photoshop, just keep working with a simple layer. The quality is gonna be a little bit worse, but you'll probably won't even notice. Now I'll duplicate the layer and rotate it 90 degrees, getting across like this. Now I'm gonna select both of these layers, duplicate those, and rotate 45 degrees. Now I'll select all 4, duplicate them, and rotate 15 degrees. Then duplicate again, just these 4, and another 15 degrees. Now select all of these layers, duplicate them, and rotate 15 divided by 2, 7.5 degrees. So you can type it in right here, or you can eyeball it. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but it looks less confusing when the star is actually perfect. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna delete the background layer. So now we have our star literally on the transparent background. And I'm gonna export this document, or save it, as a perspective star. Now we create a new document, same resolution, 8K. And now I'm gonna start about the same way, new empty layer. I'm creating a black line, same thing. But now I'm gonna duplicate it like this. You don't have to make it a smart object or anything because we're just gonna be moving it around. No loss of quality. So one of the lines will be at the very top of the document. And then I'll copy the middle one again and put the new copy at the very bottom of the document like this. Then again, I'm gonna select this middle line right here and I'm gonna just duplicate it a lot of times, like maybe 30 times. I keep duplicating right now. Then I'm gonna select all of these layers and having the move tool selected, I'll press 3 dots and use this type of alignment, distribute vertical centers. Boom, now we have our perfect array of horizontal lines. I'm gonna delete the background and save this transparent document the same way in a PNG file. Now, when you're working on your document, this is our whatever project with a doodle that we want to turn into a straight, good-looking, precise sketch. In here, we start with creating a bit of a thicker line defining the horizon. Let's say we want the horizon to be over here. So here I have the line. Now I'll import the perspective star like this. Again, if you're in Photoshop, this is gonna be a smart object by default. Keep it at that. If not, then it's just an image. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna position the star with its center on the horizon like this. So the horizontal line of the star would be exactly at the horizon. And this is our 1-point perspective. We can move it around like this. This is a situation where the vanishing point is on the canvas. We can see the vanishing point. Things go into the horizon. Then I'll scale it up holding Alt to keep the center in the same place and making sure that all the lines cover the canvas completely. Boom. Now I'm gonna select both layers, the star and the horizon we have. I'm gonna press Ctrl G and group them and called perspective guides. And there we have it. This is our layer with the perspective guide. It has a good resolution. And this is literally all we need for 1-point perspective guidance. We can make the whole thing less opaque. Now, when we want to add another vanishing point to have a 2-point perspective, usually it would be another star positioned somewhere far away beyond the canvas border, somewhere over there or much, much further away. The further away it is, the more parallel the lines are gonna be. But in here, we're running into this problem that lines become super rare, and also the super upscaled image is gonna transform for a while, and the lines will be much thicker. It's not looking that good. So instead of using a perspective star, we'll just use our perspective lines document. So I'm importing it right here. Again, it's a smart object. Now I'm gonna move the layer with the lines so the center would be on the horizon. And from here in Photoshop, I'm gonna use a right click and use the perspective transformation. In your app, you might have it, you might have something else. Maybe you would just drag the line somehow, but it's not going to be symmetrical like this. You want it to be symmetrical with the center of your layer being exactly on the horizon. This way, we're making sure that the lines, all of the lines that we're distorting right now, they will meet somewhere eventually exactly on the horizon. So there we go. Now we have our 2-point perspective, one in here and another one somewhere far away over there. And if I just draw some kind of shape, it will be perfectly distorted like this and like this as well. Now for the third vanishing point, we'll import another perspective lines layer and rotate it 90 degrees to get vertical lines. Pretty much from here, things are exactly the same. Scale it up so it would have the proper density of the lines. And then in here, you pretty much just decide on how exactly you want to tilt your image. Maybe you want to align the center of your lines to the first vanishing point, or maybe exactly to the center of the image. right click, perspective distortion, and I'm gonna do it this way right here. Tilting a little bit so the camera is looking a little bit downwards, or the other way around, making the upper side smaller. That's how we're looking upwards. In our case, since the horizon is above the center of the canvas, we're kind of naturally looking downwards more than upwards, then you should probably go with the looking downwards, so make the bottom edge smaller. Now, when you're done with positioning everything and it kind of looks confusing maybe, if you want, you can rasterize all 3 layers. If you're not in Photoshop, they're already rasterized. But what you're gonna do now, you're gonna lock transparency on all 3 layers. And I'm gonna use the gradient tool, or maybe there's a bucket tool, some kind of filling tool that would fill the whole layer with one color. And I'm gonna just change colors for each of the lines. So the first vanishing point lines will be red, the second ones will be whatever, this kind of green, and the third one will be blue, slightly violet. And now we won't confuse our directions. Even when they go a bit confusing in here, we can still perfectly know that these lines are the first vanishing point and these are the third one. So that's about it. Probably for better performance, it's a good idea to just merge the whole group. And there you go, you have your perfect perspective guides positioned where you need them. You can lock that layer and just start sketching around in here, building your perfect thing. Now, one last thing, there are so-called curved perspective systems where one or more vanishing points have their lines sort of bent. Usually it comes from the idea that if this is the horizon right here and this is the vanishing point, that means our vertical lines, they actually should sort of go away from us when we look upwards like this. Because if we look above horizon, that means things become smaller as they go away. And when we're looking downwards, things should become smaller in here because they're going further away from us downwards. And that's like contradictory because we chose these vertical lines right here to have one vanishing point at the bottom. Well, in this case, these lines will have 2 vanishing points at the bottom and at the top. And the middle of the curvature will be exactly on the horizon. Let's keep it simple like that. It's not exactly that. There's much more to it, but that's a good way to put it, I think. So for that, we can just create a third image that would be just for curved perspectives. So I have these horizontal lines right now. I'm gonna group all of them into one layer, one group. Then I'll duplicate the group and I'll make it vertical as well, like this. And this is the part where the vanishing point will be, and this is the line where the horizon will be. In this basic curved system, we're just gonna have it simple like that. I think it makes the most sense, just this simple one. And I'm also gonna import the perspective star into this image. So things are gonna look like this. Now, after that, I'm gonna merge all the lines of this grid right here. So we're just having a simple image now. And there are several ways to introduce the curvature to this system, but I think the best one is to use a distortion filter called Spherize. And that's about the best kind of spherical curvature I know that you can get in Photoshop. In other apps, it may be different. You can also just press Ctrl-T on the layer and use this mode right here, transformation mode, and use like inflate, for instance. But I noticed it has a bit of a weird thing, like this is not exactly a sphere. It has a bit of a different kind of distortion. And fisheye is also weird. It's sort of going for very weird curvature inside of the rectangle. I don't think this is the best way to do it, so Spherize is good enough. To avoid some confusion, we may also like scale the whole canvas down. Now I'm gonna delete the background and we simply export this image as well as a third PNG. And now in here, I'm gonna import it, stretch it, and decide again where we want our perspective going on. If it's gonna be at about the same place it was before, we just position things like this. So I think this is a pretty simple and light way to prepare basic tools to super quickly create any kind of perspective guides for your new drawing. Now I haven't come up with this yet in this episode, so instead I just created a star and saved it as a brush preset, which is sort of also a way to do it. This is it right here. I have this as a brush. The maximum resolution of the brush in Photoshop is 5000 pixels. And I think Photoshop has it the best. In any other app in Corel Painter, it was a much smaller brush, so the resolution is much worse. And pretty much after this, after tapping once with the brush, you just scale it up, move it around, do the same thing, but in lower resolution. Then you duplicate the star and scale it up again to a huge size, that thing I mentioned before. And the problem with this is just that this is a huge transformation of a huge amount of pixels, which works a lot slower, so I don't really recommend it, but I did see some of the professional artists usually do this, probably when they work on a smaller document to quickly come up with some kind of concept, so the resolution doesn't really matter, and this is just a drafty state of things. So yeah, you can pretty much do this with just one star saved into your brush. I recommend also using horizontal lines as a separate tool, and generally using separate transparent documents instead of brushes, because you can get any resolution you want. So there's that. I decided to turn this episode into a little big tutorial about setting up your perspective guides. Now let's go back to the Black Widow. Now this looks horrible, like not super precise, but we must go on. Next time I'll know that it would be wise to maybe just use Photoshop for sketching, because why not? Photoshop doesn't have decent blending at all, but when it comes to line art and building stuff, construction, I guess more advanced tools of editing in Photoshop are a good choice there. So yeah, I'm literally using these guides. All the vertical lines, no matter how far away they are from us, they will be just following the vertical lines of the perspective guide of that second star from the top. And all the lines that go from far to close, they will be following this central star. Now, this is another thing. It's turning into a perspective tutorial, I guess, but who cares? So I have these guides, right, to draw these big windows, like window pairs. I'm gonna make them that go on this wall and on this wall. So I have these lines from the top to show me what the vertical lines would be, and these lines from the central star to see how the horizontal lines of these windows will be. But one thing I don't know is how these distances are gonna change as windows get closer and closer to us. But what I can do is literally select one of the windows, duplicate them, and then transform them, like scale them up, scale it up, using the vanishing point that makes sense for this transformation, like the one that is creating these lines for this direction. I'm using it as a pivot point or as a transformation reference point, whatever it's called. In different apps, it's a different thing. So I just scale it up and it literally scales it up correctly according to the perspective. So there we have it. I have the exact same size of the window that is actually closer to us on that wall. And that's also an interesting thing, that when things come to creating, like drawing something that is precise, straight, like hard surface stuff, you actually should really construct it. Otherwise, it's always gonna be wrong. By the way, I did a mistake anyway. Well, not a mistake, I did scale up the window correctly, but I forgot to adjust to the fact that the vertical lines in here are more tilted like this, more. And generally there's more distortion. I think it's easier to just redraw these vertical lines. So really what we actually got from all of this is only the width of this line. The top line is really exactly the same as this one, but vertical lines, we need to draw them again, stronger distortion. I think we need to decide on where the floor is. It is time. But first, I'm gonna duplicate these windows, since this is an actual symmetrical straight building. It needs to really be symmetrical in other things as well. Well, there you go. I think I'll just do it like this. Yeah, I don't really want to continue with the very wrong positioning, like distances between these planks. I'm gonna redo it the right way. I kind of forgot that you need to be really precise when it comes to hard surface stuff. Otherwise, it's gonna look like another stupid childish drawing from an idiot. So I duplicated this pair of planks, then I'll put the pivot point of the transformation on the vanishing point, and then I'll scale it down holding Alt and Shift to the point where the bigger plank will take the place of the smaller plank. And that gives us a perfect guide for the next step of the same distance. So now I'll erase this. Actually, the distances between the planks are much bigger than I thought. They wouldn't scale down that much in the distance. So yeah, that's where it is. I'm gonna duplicate it again and I'll see if there is another one like that. Like if I can position one more. And no, I can't. It would go through the wall already. So I guess that would be enough. Actually, the same distance, the same positioning with the windows, like this and this right here is literally the same. Interesting. I made this distance a bit bigger than in here because we get to look at the planks more and more from the bottom as they are getting closer. It also would make sense to make this distance a bit shorter though, so I'll probably move this line just a little bit higher. Alright, we have a box of the room. So that's an hour of work. Did not expect this to go so slow. I think it's really worth it to have the base, especially when it needs to be just a straight room. You need to have the base just accurate, really following the perspective, without the stupid stuff that you will really regret later. Now, I wanted to make these windows into actual pairs of windows, so I'm gonna do that, I guess. As I'm building it right now, it feels like a very small room, isn't it? Well, in depth, it's pretty long, and we don't have to be at the very beginning of the room, so it may be like half of it. But in the width, since orphanage would usually have, or a workhouse, would have lines of beds like that next to the windows, in here you would barely be able to walk in between the two rows of the beds. I would say I need to make the room a lot wider, and right now is a perfect time to do it. As far as I understand, I can literally just stretch this. Yeah, and I believe it will be the perfect transformation, meaning these lines will actually be following the distortion from the upper vanishing point. And by just stretching them from the center, since the upper vanishing point is also in the center, in the middle of the canvas, if we stretch it from the center, it will still follow that distortion perfectly. So there we go. I think I like it a lot more this way. I don't think it will affect our composition all that much, so I think we're good. What if I stretch it vertically as well from the vanishing point? No, I don't like it. These rooms right here, these big places for a lot of people, like they do have pretty tall ceilings. That's like 2.5 people tall. So that counts as a tall building, but it shouldn't be like vertical. It's still wider and deeper than it is tall, just because the room is really big. Okay, I still got logic. Maybe we should introduce a little bit of the beds. I like the idea of showing the beds exactly the same way, meaning they're perfectly done. And like never touched, maybe even covered with a lot of dust, because they don't sleep in the beds. They sleep in the nest at the top. I don't know. I still feel like the ceiling, for my picture, it kind of needs to be taller, doesn't it? Just because we have these kids hanging from the thing and it feels a lot greater scale or something. Let's make it taller. The way I'll do it, I'm gonna stretch the whole thing, maybe like this. It will look weird and will make the floor a lot lower than it should be. But now I'll just, where was it? In here, so I'll literally draw it again. That's all it takes. Just a few lines for the floor and for the bottom edges of the windows. So that's what I'm gonna do. And so I did that, but as I'm editing right now, I realized I think I should have moved the floor and the bottom edge of the windows much higher, a lot closer to the horizon, just showing that our human height is pretty small comparing to the room. That's what would make this room actually look big. But alas, I did not think of that back then. Maybe I'll fix it in the future. Does it work? I think it does. Feels really claustrophobic anyway. I don't know, I don't feel the scale at all. It's a super tiny room. Do I make it even wider? I feel like I'm gonna lose all of the details of the background if I keep doing this. You know what? It may be fine if we position like a bed in here as a scale reference, because there is no scale references, and I mean, what can possibly tell you what the size of the room is? Comparing the height of it to the width? That's not a real reference, because what if I just make really tall ceilings in a really big room? And that's literally what I'm doing, so we need to actually give the eye some other reference. The beds may really work for that. Yeah, there you go, I think it's actually working. You can totally feel how you can walk in all of this space and you would be like this tall. And by the way, an interesting thing, if you would be this tall here, how tall would you be next to the kids? Say in here. So this is the, well, I mean, a super precise sketch of a human being, but I mean, this is close to what I did. I think it works out. We got the 3 dimensions next to the wall. Just another pair of beds would totally fit in here. Gotta make sure you always follow the lines. When you do, it really feels just right that this line right here is at the appropriate angle for the distortion. Actually, it should be a bit stronger. It looks cool, dynamic, and supports the rest of the picture. Now, I feel like I should end the episode here because I've been talking for a while and spent a lot of time on this, so this is probably all the time I have. I have no idea how to make episodes of proper size. But yeah, I think it would be a good place to finish this because we've taken care of the perspective hard surface part of the composition. The main thing is solved. The actual positioning in the world, in the room, the size of the room, and all the even distances and stuff like that, that's really important to have done right. We got it done right. Now, I still want to keep working a bit, so I'm gonna detail it a bit further, and you guys will see the process of that right now. So that's about it for today. I wish I'd have this floor thing figured out during the episode before I started doing these details right now, because I'll literally have to redo all of the details below the horizon line now. That's why I was so cautious about getting the basic box of the room correctly, though sadly it didn't help. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.